Thank
I
you.
heard you're back.
See, he just tuned me right out.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, John, you're on to me.
It's called marriage, Gus.
I know, right?
Okay. Lion's Den. This is what the guy said. He said, but then there is the matter of the lions themselves. Although the story in Daniel gives every indication the lions are real, it is worth noting the ancient world also knew a metaphorical use of lion's den motif, just as we do. So, for example, in Neo-Assyria, or an Neo-Assyrian letter from an ousted court official named Urab-Gula to King Ashurbanipal, Urab-Gula asked for financial assistance, and in the course of this request, he describes the royal court metaphorically as a den or pit of lions. What you were saying, Dave. As with our contemporary use, then this ancient letter employs the lion's den as a metaphor for mean colleagues or wicked competitors.
Wow.
One other thing that I grabbed here, because I was trying to see if there was any mention of lion's den in history, you know, like whether historical
Yeah.
were ever actually found, not even so much just of this, because I don't think there ever was in the Medes and the Persians or Babylon. They ever found a lion's den, but they found one in Morocco.
Wow.
What it says, according to this account, they consist of a large square cavern underneath the earth, having a partition wall in the middle of it, which is furnished with a door, which the keeper can open and close from above. By throwing in food, they entice the lions from one chamber into the other, and then having shut the door, they enter into the vacant space for the purpose of cleaning. The cavern is open above, its mouth being surrounded by a yard or a wall of a yard and a half-high over, I guess a half-high fence over which one can look down into the den. This description agrees perfectly with which is given here in the text regarding the lion's den. And he goes on to explain there was a door in the wall surrounding the cavern through which the keepers and lions could enter, except when the stone was in place. This accounts for the fact that Darius was able to converse free with Daniel before the stone was removed from the door.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
there's just not a whole bunch of historical stuff on it, but it sounds like this cavern was open, but I'm assuming Daniel's was probably maybe more of a cave or something underground, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Is there any other lion's den in the Bible, or no? It was just that.
I don't think there's other lions dens that I'm aware of. Anybody else?
I don't remember any.
Me either. How about you, Gus?
Well,
She said no.
no.
I think there's accounts of lions, and Satan is seen as a roaring lion that goes about, you know, attacking or whatever those that are.
Yeah.
So somebody want to read 19 through 23?
Sure. So at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent and in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted God. Did you want me to read any more?
No, that's good.
Okay.
So this stands out to me. Daniel's first words to the king is, "O king, live forever."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what stands out to me is, he says, Daniel, servant of the living God. You know
Right,
how all their gods are created and are dead and stone and whatever?
right.
It's really somebody who's from Persia or whatever calls his God the living God.
Mm.
What might have been your reaction?
When they called me, I'd be like, ah!
Yeah, right, you'd be twitching.
You mean when he called to Daniel? To
If
see
you were
he's alive?
Daniel, what would have been your first reaction?
I don't know.
Oh, my gosh,
I'm
anger.
sleeping. Shh, 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 shh. Make any noise, just get me out.
Yeah, get me out of here. I know, I was like, I'd have probably said, you idiot, how could you sign such a stupid decree? I did nothing wrong and you almost killed me. Get me out of here.
Yeah.
Aw.
Boy. Yeah.
That would have been my thought. Obviously, Daniel, O King, live forever. Almost like he's cool as a cucumber. Yeah, I'm cool in here.
I know.
Now, do you think there was a real angel, or was Daniel
Yeah.
signing their mouth closed as evidence of an angel?
No, I think there was a real angel. I mean, if you remember, wasn't it Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who had another person in there walking around in the what was it, the fiery
Fire.
furnace?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
So I think it was a real angel.
good point.
Me too.
Yeah, good point.
Wait, what?
What were you thinking about, Meg?
Well, I got distracted. First, I was thinking, oh yeah, the other guys said to King Darius, like, may the King Darius live forever in the beginning. And then I was thinking, how come they didn't say, well, he still has to die? Or
Who?
and I was trying to go back up to see what they said to him. Like, did they say like he had to die, or he had to be?
No, it said they had to be punished by putting him in the lion's
Oh,
den.
so it said exactly lion's den.
What happened? Hi, baby.
Wow,
Hi.
that is like, oh my gosh, I would be so nervous.
Yeah.
All right, Maddie.
I was just gonna say, I think he said, may the king live forever, because he didn't want to have to go through anything like that again.
Yes, yes, good point, Dusty.
Yeah, right.
It was wise.
Now, Daniel declares his innocence in verse 22. Do you think that, well, he says, before God, innocency was found in me, and I've done no hurt, or committed no trespass.
To you, yeah.
Yeah, to you. And I'm guessing that was, like, I think one of the things is, this is very black and white. It's hard to read between the lines here. This is a story from point A to point Z or whatever. But do you think that maybe, one of the things is somebody so high, he's probably has to be accountable in a financial sense to the king, with all the money and everything that's coming through.
As the president, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, as one of the presidents overseeing the satraps. And it would certainly give potential reason why somebody would say, well, I know they said Daniel earlier couldn't have done it, we couldn't find anything that he did wrong. But Daniel, for some reason, still has the reason to say,
Yeah.
I've done nothing wrong. I've committed no trespass to you, no hurt to you, and God found me innocent.
Yeah.
So he's got great trust in God. How does he have great trust in God?
Daniel?
What do you mean?
Yeah,
I mean, he has a strong relationship with him. He prays to him. He believes everything he says, and he's seen his power at work.
yes,
Right.
yeah. Just I think the way he answers these things. I don't know. Maybe I'm not saying this correctly. And
We're not understanding what you're asking.
yeah, like I think he has great trust. He seemingly didn't try to defend himself at all. He didn't deny anything. he was willing seemingly just to go to the lion's den and then afterwards wasn't angry about it. I would be
Yeah.
very angry about it.
That's great trust.
You think he was
I feel
afraid?
like, too, it kind of shows you like, I don't, wait, who wrote Daniel?
Daniel?
Yes, I'm guessing Daniel did. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because
I thought he did.
then he refers to himself in the like Daniel from the power of the lion. He rescued Daniel from the power of the lion. So he writes his name instead of like he.
Right.
Me, like instead of me and I.
Yeah.
He didn't write in the first person. He wrote in the
I'm
third
just trying to
person.
think, I'm like, you know, if I feel like if somebody saw like, I don't know, someone else going through something, you know, and they're not complaining and they're not, you're like, wow, like that is like how I want to be. But when you like, if you like took apart, not, I want that faith, I should say, not how you want to be. But then if you take apart like somebody like and what they're thinking and all this, it would be like a dip, like, you know, if you knew what people were actually thinking.
But
Like,
in this, it starts out by saying how great Daniel is in his spirit, how he has, how he said, they pervert, then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him. So I almost expect him to act not like me or you, but like this person with an excellent spirit inside of him who doesn't get bitter or resentful or angry, or he was like, right, I'm still here. God saved me. He sent me an angel. And by the way, I didn't do anything wrong. You know that, right? Like
Yeah.
I'd be like, you know what you did to me. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
But I
But
feel
that's
I-
not, I don't have, apparently don't have the excellent spirit inside.
Yeah.
None of us do.
I know.
Meg,
Ah,
I feel like there's only like, you know, we only know bits and pieces of it. You know, like he had such a long life, but you only get out like the certain,
like 5 or 6
Ye-
different things.
yeah, like different like secluded situations. So I feel like it's kind of like interesting to see like how, I guess it would be how God shows you you know, how to deal in certain situations, like,
If you trust him enough.
yeah.
I think that's
maybe
the
just
bottom line.
even- And even maybe so, because if he is writing this, he's not saying, you know, I'm scared to death. He's like focusing on like, okay, this is what I do. I pray. And then I talk, and then I'm respectful to the king. And then, you know,
My
Yeah, like-
authority, because that's what you're supposed to be,
right.
respectful to your authority.
I don't
I
Yeah.
know.
don't think he ever shows he's afraid. All the snippets we see are very consistent, and he
Right.
never shows fear to me. He always shows trust that he's right where God wants him. And if God's going to take him, then he's going to take him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, he does. Meg, I think back in chapter 4, maybe, Nebuchadnezzar writes that chapter. If you remember, one of the chapters, he
Oh,
writes it from the first person. But this could have been
Yeah.
Daniel's.
Like the way he writes.
This could have been Daniel's, you know, one of his servants or something. We don't know. Maybe he just wrote it from the third person because he was being dictated. It was being
Yeah.
dictated to him. Now, here's a question. All right, now, if Daniel had been hurt or even killed, would this have spoken of Daniel's lack of faith? Because remember, he says, God, there's plenty of people in God's that are innocent that die.
Right.
right. No, I don't think so.
No,
But-
but I think people would be like, oh, well, they would question.
But they would
it.
assume it was,
Well, yeah,
or
probably.
they would assume he's not the true living God.
Okay, that's gonna open another line of questioning shortly.
Okay.
True, I agree, but so did God deliver Daniel because of his faith or his innocence?
His faith.
Okay.
Yes, but he's always trying to
It says his innocence.
say something.
His
He's always,
innocence.
His innocence.
What were you saying, Don?
he
Sorry, Don.
delivered him because he's got a plan. Whether he delivered him or he died, he always has a plan, but yes, I mean,
Yeah, he's always
Yeah.
got a purpose behind why he does something, even though we have
right.
no
Because
idea.
he allows innocent people to die.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily because of Daniel, was it? Was it
No.
because it was his plan?
It was his plan.
Yeah.
Right, it was right. Which will lead into the next questions, but let's read the next four verses. The last, is it the last four here, 24 through 28?
Okay. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones.
Oh my God.
Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heaven and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
24 says all the presidents and satraps and wives and children are killed.
That's
Yeah.
harsh, man. The children, what did they do?
And that was just for them being facetious, like, not facetious, but is that
Jealous,
Manipulative.
Felicitous.
jealous and
Tricky.
manipulative
Yeah.
and just terrible. They were terrible. But the kids, that kind what?
Yeah, like that's so sad.
Yeah,
I know.
Now from time to time, I talk about the Septuagint,
Yeah.
Mhm.
which is nothing more than the Greek translation of the Old Testament that was around when Jesus and his disciples and Paul, that's what they read from the
Yeah.
Old Testament. So it's a little different there. This is what it says. It says, then those two men who had borne witness against Daniel, and they and their wives and children were cast to the lions, and the lions slew them and brake their bones. So in this account of the punishment meted out to the accusers, the victims are only two.
Two.
The two, but with their wives and children. And this writer contemptuously remarks that the lion's den must have been large enough to contain, he says this sarcastically, it must have been large enough to contain 122 men, because there's 120 plus the two presidents, along with all their wives and children.
Wait, what?
The writer that just wrote that I
Right.
just grabbed the statement, was facetiously saying it was probably only two people and their wives, two wives and however many children that were actually the ones that were thrown in. Otherwise, the lion's den would have been large enough to contain 122 men, which
Oh.
would include the satraps, the governors, of course, their
Gotcha.
wives and their children, which case you would think they could do two at a time. But the point being, he's being sarcastic. So yeah, it does make more sense that he would just throw those guilty in.
Listen, I think that's all you really have to throw in, because once you see the whole two whole families with their kids killed like that, you're not going to do that again.
Agree.
Nobody's going to go against him.
Yeah.
I mean, the God of Israel. That's what I mean.
So Darius writes unto the people, the God of Daniel is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom, which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. Now that's the king of the Medes and Persians saying that.
Crazy. Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar previously stated, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men and giveth to whomever he will. And then he even says at another point, his dominion is forever, or everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from one generation to another, or one generation to generation. Now Belshazzar appears, to Belshazzar there appears handwriting on the wall that scares him senseless. Okay, so God goes to great lengths to show himself strong to these kings of Babylon or Medo-Persia. All right, now, or we could say God is showing himself strong to the ruling authority of these nations.
Yeah.
All right, now, when I say that because I'm trying to tie what we talked about last week, the Elohim, and we had made mention of God's, for some reason back in Genesis, God got angry and divided the nations and then seemed to have taken Israel or Jacob as his portion and put some of his Elohim, of which, remember last week we read Psalms 82, which talked about God was yelling at his Elohim saying, you took advantage of these people and these nations that you were in charge of, and you, instead of feeding them and clothing them, you did this to them. And remember how he ripped them a new rear end
Yeah.
at that point. But the point seems to suggest, and it suggested here, that God wasn't showing these miracles to spread the gospel of God and to convert everybody to Judaism, but he was seemingly doing these miracles to show, of course, the king and his high staff. But I think the ruling authorities that God had given authority to these other nations, and God had given them authority, but then still takes the liberty at times and says, yo, I'm the king here. I do what I want. I am the most high. And, I am the, like he says here, he shows himself, even though I've given my authority to you, and someday I'm going to clean house on earth and in heaven, and you're all going to be like in hell or the bottomless pit or whatever, wherever they're eventually cast into. But God takes the liberty to show himself strong to these wicked authorities in spiritual places that have authority over these other nations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he almost lays down the gauntlet to spiritual authorities, or his Elohim, from time to time of various heathen nations, by having their rulers state things such as, what Darius said, or what Nebuchadnezzar said. And, like in verse 26, men tremble in fear. This is Darius speaking, verse 26, men tremble in fear because before the God of Daniel, for he is the living and eternal God, and the kingdom shall not be destroyed, and his dominion is forever. Now, I'm sure in these spiritual authorities, like we're going to see if we keep reading Daniel, like when we're going to get another picture into the spirit realm where like the archangel or whatever, Michael, is fighting against, I think, like the ruler of one of the ruling spiritual authorities of Persia, I think, and there's another one that's mentioned too. I'm drawing a blank on what that is, but we don't see that. Every so often we're given the glimpses of it, and it's almost like God says, oh, I'm still here and you're still going to get what's yours. But he has to use, and he doesn't have to, but he uses men, Daniel in particular, because he's so, what's the right word? He's such a loyal, godly, God-fearing man, that he's willing to put himself in these crazy situations and not worm his way out of it in order for God's power to show.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're saying. And even if he did worm himself out of it, I'm sure God would still love him.
Oh, absolutely. But he wouldn't.
It wouldn't matter. But this is just a way of showing us how powerful our God is.
But he wouldn't have the opportunity. Well, he wouldn't certainly have this opportunity to show himself strong in front of these other spiritual authorities, which,
Right.
again, if they're in part of the divine council, even though they're wicked, God says, well, I've given you a purpose and I'm going to let my plan work out before you guys are, thrown in the dumpster or whatever. God still allows it to happen, which is
Right.
odd. But he does, like, he's not trying to, what's the word? He's not trying to evangelize the Medes and Persians. He's just using his fist to say, I'm the Most High here.
Yeah, and it's odd because he doesn't want to evangelize the Medes and Persians. Right now, it's only about Israel.
Right.
In this Old Testament, it's very different.
Well,
Very-
think of it this way. In the Old Testament, it's his one little nation, but when Jesus comes and the gospel spread to the whole world, technically he's regathering those nations,
Right,
which he will eventually do in totality
right,
at the second coming. But right now, we're just seeing him kind of overseeing one nation and saying, well, I've given these other lesser beings authority over these wicked nations, but they still do my bidding.
Mm, mhm.
it's true too. And it's funny how they all call him the amazing God and the holiest God and the living God, and it's crazy that they don't even know him and they call him that.
Mhm.
I know, right?
Uh,
So a reminder of the Elohim that he's on the throne. And we're gonna look at this again, because this is a very interesting thing that we don't know anything about, that I think is really there, but that that their reign comes to an end. He brings spiritual authority, wicked spiritual authority, to an end of his choosing. But what else do you guys see in Daniel 6? Anything?
You know what I find weird? Like, same thing with Nebuchadnezzar and how Darius is saying how great God is. You'd think that there'd be some change in them, that maybe there would be more people that became, God-fearing people because of this, but it doesn't seem like we ever read anything about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it seems like they kind of eventually get to the point where something like Nebuchadnezzar has to be reminded that God sits on, dictates
Yeah.
the thrones, what happens on earth, in the kingdom of men, I think it's described of. But yeah, they're like inclined to believe that there's many gods or something.
Yeah, it just fizzles out. Like, they have these great proclamations about God, and then it just fizzles out. You never see anything else about it.
Yeah. It says Daniel prospers in the reign of Cyrus the Persian, who I think we said Darius is Cyrus's uncle, I think. And I think that Cyrus married Darius's daughter. So there's
Cousin.
kind of
Yeah.
family ties too, or something there. And Cyrus, I think, was the head general at this point as well. Cyrus is mentioned, I think, as being a servant of God, even though technically he's not a Christian, or he doesn't really.
He's a servant of God.
Cyrus will be mentioned in places like in Isaiah. And a lot of people thought that Trump was an example of Cyrus in his first presidency. Whether that's true, I'm not saying I believe it, but some people did. But he was mentioned specifically in the Bible, but in Isaiah, Cyrus was.
Okay, not Trump.
Which is odd. What did you say then?
I said not Trump.
Well, I'm not saying whether he was or not, but I don't
No,
really.
no.
No,
You said
she's
Cyrus was mentioned in the Bible. I go, okay, not Trump.
Oh,
Wait,
yeah,
because why?
I think Cyrus is mentioned as an individual who did the will of God. In other words, Cyrus, I think part of Cyrus's deal is how all these people are going to be sitting in Babylon, and they're sitting, Daniel being one of them. Well, after 70 years, what we find is Daniel, who's an avid reader of the scriptures at the time of what they had, saw somewhere in one of the passages that said that God will release his people after 70 years. So Daniel begins to pray and say, okay, God, well, it says this here, or, are you going to do this? Are you going to honor your word? And Cyrus is involved in letting the people go back to Jerusalem or Judah.
Oh, okay.
And so Cyrus is mentioned directly by name, I think in Isaiah, I don't know if it's 40, 41, 42, 43 or something. And he's technically carrying out the will of God without even
Gotcha.
knowing it.
Yeah.
And when he discovers that he is actually written in their scriptures, he's blown away by it.
Wow.
Yeah, but he's technically not a Jewish or, like he's not some spiritual guy. He's just a guy that was, God mentions in regard of doing something that's going to be very valuable for his people.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
I gotta read up on this Cyrus is Trump.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I kind of
Look,
scoff.
look, it's starting to make noises like somebody's listening.
Uh-oh, Big
Hear that?
Brother. By the way, it does mention in the Bible the last trump. Jesus talked about the last trump.
Oh, I gotcha. I gotcha.
Okay. I said to somebody today who asked how mom was doing, a girl from Cherry Hill, I
Yeah.
said, she's great. And if she was, 20 years younger, or at least she'd probably have charged the White House too. She'd be in the group. She laughed and said, my dad too.
My dad too. Oh my God.
She wouldn't. She
So
would have.
funny.
She would have
She
joined.
would
the
have charged the
Republican
White House too
Party. I know, right?
for Trump. But she, because she's too old. The girl said, my dad would have too. He loved Trump.
Oh, that's so funny.
You too, Meg.
Huh?
Yeah,
I
your
said my
dad too.
dad. No, I said my dad too.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
definitely your dad. Definitely.
Wow.
So next week we get back to these dreams and these weird sort of, if we continue on through 7, I just feel like since we've gotten this far, let's try and
Yeah.
read the rest of it
I love
let's do it.
Daniel.
and
I think
harvest
it's good.
what we can out of the rest of it, because it gets really complex and there's things in here people are still saying, God's going to fulfill such and such that Daniel talked about. And so it's really complex and I don't even understand it, but it gives me a reason and maybe you guys a reason to try and read this and figure out what's being spoken about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I have a habit of like thinking things and then I forget if it's in the Bible or if it was something I thought.
Or if you thought it.
Oh, Meg, you're funny.
Well, I might read it. I think it's very interesting, Daniel, but then I won't understand it. So then I just keep reading and move on, but not understanding. So I like when you pull in all the other stuff that you've heard and read.
I think
Yeah.
the next chapter is a dream that Daniel has, because the other dreams haven't been Daniel's dreams. They've been Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, right?
Right.
Yeah. This is a
So-
full piece.
So the next one is his Daniel's dream, and it'll be back. This will be one of those weird things. This will go back to Belshazzar's reign. So it doesn't numerically doesn't follow that 7 happened after 6. 7 probably happened before 5. So technically it should be chapter 5, and the handwriting on the wall would have been after chapter 7.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see what we get out of it and we'll go from there. But that's all I have, girls.
Yeah. I
That was
love it.
good. Thanks, Dad.
Thanks. I would say that if you haven't watched The Chosen, it's a really good, I'm waiting for them
Oh.
to release the second season.
Where is it on?
I watched it on,
Like
I
Netflix?
downloaded a free app. I had to watch 30 seconds of commercials on Peacock.
Oh,
So I downloaded Peacock and watched it there. And I was just like this the whole time. Because it's just so good.
What is it? Dick? What's it about?
It's when Jesus first, it's right before he to, start preaching and call himself the Messiah. He goes to the wedding and he increases the wine. When I asked you about Mary Magdalene, it
Oh, right.
said they used to call her Lilith, because that's what the demons were. Lilith.
Oh, Lily.
Because they're demons. And God, Mary, she was running away from him and he called her Mary, and she stopped and came back to him and he got rid of the devils. So then she traveled with the disciples, and it's how he goes through and he
It's all
says,
about
follow
him.
me to the disciples. So like what I find so interesting is I think they're portraying Matthew to be like
Madeline.
maybe on the spectrum or something. Matthew was really good with numbers, really intelligent. He was a tax collector for the Romans, and everybody hated him. And he was odd. Like Simon Peter's like, you're kind of odd, aren't you? Said to him. But it's just so interesting, God's reaction, how they portray God's reaction. You think, I bet that's how he did react. I don't know. I was enthralled by the first season. I really loved it.
It
Just a
fills-
thought.
It fills in a little bit of the gaps, you're like saying.
It just, you're watching it like really happen. It feels like, I know you're not, but it feels like they're portraying it the way it should have been portrayed, at least in my opinion. That's why I'm like endorsing it. I can't wait for season 2 to be released.
Meg, remember you were asking me one time about all these other books of the Bible?
Yeah.
And we were talking about that, and we were always brought up to believe, oh, you never read that. I've never read anything about any of that stuff. I really haven't, but I've been listening to this guy lately who's really interesting. He's a professor at I don't know what school he is, but he's got like this degree in like the historical Old Testament history and the in between the Old and the New Testament history. And he talks and he knows all this backstory. He's kind of talking about like something that provides a little bit of a backstory of Jesus, but he talks about just one of the books, which is Enoch, and not the whole thing, just little snippets that he says, hey, if you look over here, Jude quotes from this and Peter quotes from this. So if those guys read those books and used it,
Wow.
a portion
Yeah.
of it, it's not canon scripture, but it's historical information that if those guys in their day were forced to read it, and Paul seemed like he referenced it, you'd say, well, maybe it can fill in a little bit of the backstory here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, but I've always thought that's a big no-no or a lesson.
Where do you get
Yeah.
it from? Well, they tell us all kinds of
No.
stupid things,
Yeah,
don't
I
they?
don't know. I actually looked it on Amazon. Like I looked some of the books up on Amazon just to see, not like, I mean, I haven't even gotten through the whole Bible yet, like detailed. I'm still like in the beginning I did the New Testament first and now I'm in the old one. But some of the reviews on the ones that were translated were like, oh, there was like misspells and stuff. So I wonder if because it was so pushed out, they never like truly did.
Yeah, I saw the same thing, Meg.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't want to order this if it's all not.
We're
accurate.
gonna be cut off in like 30 seconds, just so you know.
Okay.
Okay.
It's as long as you just accept it, this is not truth. A lot of this is exaggeration, but maybe there's a little bit of history in some of them that are, say, well, that's interesting. And maybe this helps me understand
Right.
stuff that's in the Bible.
Right.
That God